I've spoken a lot on this channel about the importance of genre distinction, especially in the field of racing and driving games. Even to this day, I find myself talking to people who are surprised and a little confused about all the different directions that racing games have gone down over the years, and how certain types of them are grossly underrepresented in today's market as a result. After all, if you think that an arcade racer is anything that is not a simulation, you'd think that genre was doing just fine, right? Well, that's why this is an important discussion to have, so I'm putting this video out here to give everyone a much more detailed view of the racing game gamut. Let's start with racing games that aren't really racing games at all. Driving games. It's still a subset of the racing genre because, as I've stated in the past, a genre is not what you're doing but how you're doing it. But it's more of an outlier than everything else you'll see here. Simply put, if you remove the racing component from a racing game outright, you get a driving game. The objective can be literally anything except trying to beat other cars to a destination. Examples of this would range from Crazy Taxi and Outrun to stuff like Spy Hunter and even driver training titles. Your mileage may vary on Hang On because the setting is a series of point-to-point races, even though the race itself doesn't factor into the gameplay or the results at all. It's just part of the background, at least until it came to the Genesis. Now, you could probably apply all of the other distinguishing labels you'll be seeing throughout this video to various driving games alone, but I'm collecting them all here for the sake of brevity. When Gran Turismo dropped in the late 90s, the entire racing landscape shifted. Up to that point, everything fit conveniently into either the racing or driving boxes, so having something that made a respectable effort to mimic reality was novel, inspiring imitators both successful and otherwise, and giving rise to the simulation racing genre. It took some time to mature, of course, as you can go back and watch videos of the first 3 Gran Turismo games where reality is clearly nowhere to be found, but it didn't take long for them to grow into the label and come into their own. These games have only gotten more detailed and sophisticated as time has gone on, unquestionably still helmed by Gran Turismo, but followed faithfully by Forza Motorsport, iRacing, Dirt Rally, and Formula One, with other fare like Assetto Corsa and Project Cars also representing this arm of the genre. Combat racers are what you get when you take a racing game and arm the vehicles with all manner of weaponry to try and more directly prevent your opponents from reaching the finish line. And these generally come in 2 flavors, your lighthearted kart racers like Mario Kart, Sonic All-Stars, and Crash Team Racing, or stuff with a decidedly different tone like the Wipeout series. These games can all have varying degrees of commitment to the use of weapons as an equalizer. While Mario Kart will noticeably favor lagging drivers with better weapons to close the gap, games like Wipeout or Sonic All-Stars really couldn't care less, just as likely to give a lead driver a truly race-changing item as they would to the stragglers. Now, I need to make a brief side note here to reiterate, yes, Wipeout is a combat racer, not a futuristic racer. Futuristic racing is not a genre, it's a visual direction, and you can pretty much apply it to any of the genres mentioned here, except perhaps simulations. But come to think of it, with Vision GT now being a thing, even that line is getting blurred. Take a few laps in the Dodge Tomahawk and try convincing yourself that the age of the futuristic racing sim isn't upon us. And because of the progression of time, arcade racers actually come in 3 flavors. The first is your classic top-down stuff like Championship Sprint, RC Pro-Am, Micro Machines, and Super Off-Road. You don't see as many of these around anymore, although a deep dive into Steam or the eShop will show you that they are still being made, they just aren't as prominent. Everything else comes from the classic chase camera and pole position. Also, shout out to the criminally underrated Suzuka 8 Hours because this is the last chance I'm going to get in the video to touch on it. There's another distinction I need to address that requires me to fast forward to the 90s. Yes, there is a distinct Japanese-Western split in arcade racing, every bit as pronounced as the one in RPGs. But we have to start talking about the modern arcade racer with the big 4 of Japanese arcade racers: Virtua Racing, Daytona USA, Ridge Racer, and the fashionably late Sega Rally Championship. These 4 games to this day provide an effective litmus test if you ever need to ask if another game is a Japanese-style arcade racer. At the core, these are straightforward circuit racers that eschew realistic driving mechanics in favor of easily explained and implemented handling systems that give each game a distinct feel. Every design decision is made in the interests of keeping the game moving and competitive, even if that means having things like spectacular collisions off the table. No matter what happens, you're back on the track and moving in seconds, because the brief moment of not driving optimally when you know your opponents are is critical to the outcome of a race. No need to make things worse by ending your race on the spot or making your defeat an actual foregone conclusion. Now, the other side of the arcade racing coin comes from the West, and by the West I basically mean Midway because they were the only ones really propping up Western arcade racers in the 90s. Cruis'n and Rush are your founding fathers here, and in comparison to their Japanese counterparts, there's a huge emphasis on spectacle and exploration. Wholly unconcerned with optimal racing lines, the possibility that variables might prevent you from recapturing a sick course time you put down once, or standard track layouts in general, Western arcade racers are rife with shortcuts, ambient traffic, and flashy set pieces. Put all that together and you have a fun formula with lots of casual appeal that has grown to include the likes of Split Second, Test Drive, and one of my personal favorites, Asphalt. Crank that Western arcade racer formula up to 11 and you get action racing. Action racers' defining trait is that races get so busy with other elements, police chases, alternative objectives, vehicular combat, sometimes even missions and other open world tropes, that the racing can sometimes feel secondary to everything else that's going on. In the early days, the only distinguishing trait between a Western arcade racer and an action racer was whether the format of the game could be adapted to an arcade cabinet. But today things are a little more cut and dried. Games include, but are certainly not limited to, most Need for Speed titles, although that series is a goddamn chameleon and has worn most racing genre hats over the years, Burnout, and The Crew. In fact, the genre label was given by Ivory Tower developers on an E3 stream whilst plugging the original Crew game. Most AAA racing development today goes into this branch of the genre, and because of the archaic mentality that everything that is not a simulation is arcade by default, often gets confused for arcade racing. Now, our final stop on this journey is one of my favorites, the hybrid racer. Sometimes a receptacle for simulation racers that fell short of the definition, but also those that purposely eschewed it in the name of accessibility or rule of fun. Metropolis Street Racer, aka Project Gotham Racing, is widely regarded as the pioneer of hybrid racing games, as it couldn't be reasonably slotted into either the arcade or simulation categories purely by virtue of fence sitting, but the sheer quality of the game demanded its own classification. Over time, it has expanded to include greats like Grid and the mainline Dirt series, which do a great job of representing the style of play during our eternal vigil for a potential Project Gotham Racing 5. There are two main reasons I recorded this video. First, I will always take the opportunity to point out how wide open the Japanese arcade racing genre is for someone to come in and revitalize it completely. Also, if you have PlayStation Plus Premium, go download Ridge Racer 2 as one of the best examples of them, because it just made its North American debut and everyone should get the chance to see how great it is. Secondly, it's always good to be able to speak in a distinct and detailed manner about your interests, especially when the industry is, either wittingly or unwittingly, trying to gaslight us that the arcade racing genre is thriving just because Need for Speed and Burnout, which have nothing to do with arcade racing, make money hand over fist every time EA releases one. Well, that's all for now. If you like this video, then please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. If you're really enjoying all this content, then you can also consider clicking the notification bell so that you're informed whenever a new video goes live, and I greatly appreciate that. Until next time, I'm Patrick Mifflin, sounding off.